Okay. Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Works for me.
Today we are sitting down with Stan Knight, founder of Zachary Knight Enterprises, to talk about his innovative Inspector in a Box program. Stan grew up in northern Manitoba. He started his professional life as an RCMP officer and later moved into construction, insurance, and mortgage work. Over the past decade, he held a series of broad governance and consulting roles, gaining deep experience in government-related inspections, project management, and community-focused initiatives. Those experiences led him to launch his own company, dedicated to providing practical, locally driven solutions for Indigenous housing and infrastructure. One of the flagship ideas emerging from his work is the Inspector in a Box program, a non-profit styled service that equips communities with trained inspectors, transparent cost estimates, and a framework for managing projects from start to finish. In our conversation, we trace Stan's journey from the front lines of public safety to entrepreneurship, explore the values that drive his work, and hear about the partnerships and goals that shape his vision of stronger, safer Indigenous communities.
All right. You were just did you just fly back from somewhere I saw yesterday? Were you in Manitoba or something?
Yeah, I was in Manitoba doing a board governance meeting for my own home nation.
Okay. Because who is your home nation, or which is your home nation?
Opaskwayak Cree Nation.
Opaskwayak.
The Paw, Manitoba.
Oh, the Paw. Okay. And so you're from Manitoba, from the Paw area, and then you're right now in BC, right?
Yeah, in Kelowna.
In Kelowna, and that's where you're kind of running your operations full time now.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So just kind of walk us through, where do you want to start? Do you want to start with Inspector in the Box? Do you want to inspect or start with kind of your, your history and experience in this industry?
Yeah, I can start off. I can kind of give you a background blurb as to where we came from and how we wound up doing what we're doing.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. That's where we'll get started. Welcome to the Hazardscape podcast, where we discuss Indigenous emergency management as our small contribution to enhancing Indigenous community public safety in our efforts to reconcile the relationship between the Crown and all nations. Yeah, good morning, Stan. Thanks for joining me on this episode. Want to kind of just start to dig in on, starting with your experience and how that led you to Inspector in a Box.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Brad. Really appreciate it. Just I can kind of give you the background as to who we are and how we wound up in this situation.
Yeah.
So I'm originally from Opaskwayak Cree Nation in northern Manitoba. I left school early to help support my mom and brother. I come from a single parent family. So my early education was in construction. And then after that, I went and joined the RCMP when I was young and spent my career policing northern Manitoba and Nunavut, and really saw a lot of socioeconomic issues that are facing Indigenous communities in the north. And after that, I eventually retired from the RCMP. I took a management role with a large lumber supply company back home in the Paw. And I spent 10 years looking after 17 First Nations across northern Manitoba. I did a lot of their project management, and I would actually fly into the communities and do the measuring windows and doors and material takeoffs and scopes of work and stuff like that. And I would do a lot of the shipping to those communities. And it was during that time that I really saw a lot of the issues with Indigenous housing and the high cost of shipping into remote communities, as well as the predatory nature of contractors. I've run into a lot of contractors who just talk negatively about working in Indigenous communities, but they still take the work because it was so profitable for them.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of other good contractors that I love working with, but there was still that really predatory side to the work that was being done in remote communities in the north. Eventually, I ended up taking a role with my own community as quality control inspector and project manager. During that time, I also branched out into doing home inspections and building condition assessments for Government Canada and mortgage sale inspections, as well as insurance adjusting, handling large loss claims, fires, floods, mass wind events, and stuff like that. And this was still back home in Nepal in Pasquak Nation. And about a year into that, we had a loss in our family that greatly affected kind of our trajectory and what we were doing. And so I ended up leaving my community's role and continued on with the home inspections and insurance adjusting for another year in Nepal, which allowed me to be home with my family. Eventually, we transitioned out of the community into southern Manitoba and Brandon, where I set up shop doing home inspections and insurance adjusting. I ended up certifying as a master inspector for residential commercial units, and we continued working with insurance adjusting, handling claims all across Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Northwest Ontario. And after about 5 years, we transitioned out of those roles, and I had kind of decided to follow my heart and be specifically involved in Indigenous housing, because the reality was in 50 years of my life, the condition and quality of Indigenous housing just has never changed, and I felt that I had enough of a background and skill set to actually have an impact in that. So we moved out to BC 3.5 years ago, and during the first 2.5 years, I worked with several different Indigenous housing groups, because I thought in order to be impactful in this role that I would have to work with an Indigenous housing organization. So I worked with Chwepem Tribal Council, Niskalism's government, Silcoteen National Government, and Kalama Nation and Paul River. And I just continued to see a commonality in issues that they were facing in terms of housing staffs being understaffed, underfunded, overwhelmed, really reactionary in nature, and not really moving a lot of housing programs forward. So that kind of led us to launch our Inspector in a Box program in January 2025, where we decided to focus on remote communities and provide a capacity development idea in terms of us providing these remote communities with the tools and training to do the initial building condition assessments, inspections for existing properties, and being able to do the cost estimating and scopes of work and gathering the data needed for energy rebate program to help offset those costs for the renovations, as well as doing the funding applications to actually put them in a position to renovate the existing homes that they have. And it's kind of morphed from that initial launch in January last year into a national home inspection certification program, as well as a franchise modeling system. But it kind of grew from there as well into a nonprofit foundation, because we started actually looking at the Indigenous construction economy, and we kind of, from various meetings with different organizations, we kind of saw there's about $2 billion that goes into that ecosystem for new building, new residential construction, as well as renovation repairs for existing homes. And right now, about 80 to 90% of that is actually leaving in the pockets of consultants and contractors that don't really have a vested interest in the economic development of those communities that they're working in. So we started asking ourselves the question of how can we retain more of that wealth within the communities? And so that kind of led us to the creation of our Knight Myers Memorial Foundation, where our revenue from our Zachary Knight Enterprises and Inspector in a Box program is actually funneled into that nonprofit with the sole responsibility of divesting into three streams. First stream, which we just announced a few weeks ago, is our Indigenous Scholarship Program, where we fund 4-year degree programs as well as 2-year trade programs for Indigenous students. And the focus for that scholarship is a $10,000 scholarship to actually pay rent. Because we've heard a lot of students talk about, yeah, I got sponsored to go to school, but I couldn't afford to live there. So we want to provide that avenue for these Indigenous students to be able to actually move to these communities and get their education. The other aspect of that is in 2027, we hope to launch an Indigenous Business Incubator program so we can actually take candidates who are interested in standing up businesses and providing them the education to come through a program where they understand what it takes to stand up a business on and off reserve. Like taxation is a big issue for our people, understanding what's options that we have in terms of taxation on and off reserve, legal liabilities, core registration, banking, all those things that come with standing up a business. And the final aspect of this was the intention to launch our capital investment program in 2028, where we provide $100,000 working capital to actually stand these businesses up and provide them the capital to build their businesses for that first year instead of them worrying about am I going to pay my bills this month, having that comfort and knowledge knowing that they have a full year to succeed. And then the other thing is that we want to change that question that Indigenous entrepreneurs always face from what's your credit score. We want to change that to asking the more important question in our eyes is, do you have community support? If you have community support, then we believe that you're 99% more likely to succeed. And that's the thing that we want to focus on. Yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
That's it in a nutshell. A long journey from, a rookie RCMP officer in training right up through to where you are today, with the Inspector in the Box program, your not for profit, and then also moving into Indigenous entrepreneurship support and student support, education support as well.
Mm-hmm.
It slipped my mind that you used to, you're retired RCMP, which I think gives you a spectacular view of, like you said, the social side of communities with the legal understanding of, some of the barriers with the Crown's legal system and how that impacts housing and people and culture. And even youth who are trying to make a go of it, even business owners who are trying to make a go of it, because if they're not starting out in a safe and healthy house, then their chance of success later in life is decreased, right?
Oh yeah, that's so true. Because we strongly believe that success starts from home, whether that's health or succeeding in life. Because you can build the fanciest school in the world. You can spend $50 million and hire the greatest teachers. But if this child is coming to school and they just spend 18 hours a day surviving their home environment, dealing with mold and bacterial contaminations and pest infestations and all these other detriments, then they're not primed for success, right? Like that 6 hours that they spend at school, it's just a reprieve from the battle that they're fighting at home. You're not going to succeed like that. And even the other thing is like in the medical situations where they discharge elderly patients to go back home to recover from respiratory illnesses, and then they're back in an environment that has that same bacterial contamination that caused the illness in the first place, like they're not going to recover. It's just going to be just a vicious cycle. So we need to provide safe, comfortable, healthy homes.
Yeah, absolutely. And from my perspective, the opportunity in that whole system of housing and health and safety for families and community is in, we focus right in the emergency management cycle. So helping nations and other communities, helping them to become aware that there's opportunity following an emergency or disaster to use government funding that they may not have access to through regular grant programs that could really boost the health and safety of the home and take a lot of reprieve off their regular housing operations budget, because for me, it's a really sad system. Canada is very focused on response and recovery, and unfortunately, what that means is, a bad thing has to happen before you can get support, good support, proper support to fix all of the pre-existing issues like mold, asbestos, even furnaces that aren't working great, or HVAC systems that haven't been cleaned for decades. And using it's horrible to say that you want to take advantage of a very vulnerable time as a disaster to give them a nation or community this boost, but you have to take advantage of the tools that are available. And I keep, like, whenever I come across a community that wants to talk, like, I always tell them, okay, we've got access to an organization that Inspector in the Box that does home assessment training, and it can focus on damage assessment. And, we can make that part of your disaster recovery planning, right? So you can mobilize those resources really quickly. Because I know when I follow you on LinkedIn, and you recently put out a LinkedIn post about how it's more effective to renovate than it is to constantly be rebuilding, right? I think that's something you put out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why we're in this space in terms of renovation repair, because like in Canada right now, there's recent numbers that were disclosed, like, say there's over 85,000 homes in Canada on First Nation land that need extensive repairs. And this is extensive, not minor repairs, but in the $100,000 range. And the reality is, even with all the money that's going into new construction with the modular units and so forth, the number of homes that are being decommissioned and deemed unlivable is actually outstripping the amount of homes that we can build right now. So we're losing ground every year. So our belief is that we need to focus on fixing the existing homes that we have and creating a safe, comfortable home for the next 15 years. And that gives us time to actually make headway on fulfilling and closing that gap for new homes that are needed.
Yeah, and I've bared witness to that on many nations that have been exposed to even just wildfire smoke contamination. The flames of the fire have not entered the community or burned down a structure, but just from the amount of smoke that structures in so many remote communities have been, it's subjected to over the course of a summer, some of them like months of smoke. I've brought in environmental hygienists and done tape lift tests on homes, and they are contaminated with ash, soot, and char. Not only in the attics, but if windows are left open, or if there isn't, if windows are broken, or if there is major air seal issues, then those little micro pieces of contamination get in, and they, especially in the attic, they don't go away. They get in the insulation, asbestos, vermiculite, whatever's up there. And right when in the springtime, when the humidity comes up and there's some rain, you can start to smell that smoke from the attic because it activates all of that stuff. And, I know like First Nations want to get home as quick as possible after an evacuation, especially if it's wildfire. And they can. It's just they also have the opportunity to have, someone trained through your program in their community that can mobilize not only, the damage assessment or home assessment piece, but they can, create relationships with environmental hygienists and other testing companies to mobilize in there and do tape lift tests, after an evacuation to get a reading of contamination. And if it's shown to be contaminated, then that's when you bring in the restoration piece. That's when you do your assessment, you bring in the restoration, and you can clean the whole home because you can't clean asbestos, you can't clean vermiculite, you can't clean insulation. That's one opportunity. We worked with a nation up way on the border of Alberta, Northwest Territories. Again, a lot of smoke. First Nations Inuit Health Branch at Indigenous Services Canada, they told us to test all of the outside cisterns after the evacuation for contaminated water. And that was all those cisterns were supposed to be tested anyway, but they couldn't, the government couldn't mobilize to get up there, and it just kept getting put off and put off. Finally, because of their evacuation and the big wildfires, we were able to get a team up there, test the cisterns, clean them, sterilize them, right? That wasn't done out of their normal operating budget. It was done out of a totally brand new funding bucket. And now all those homes have, clean cisterns again. And it's, to have someone trained under your program in a region or a community that can mobilize quickly and kind of help guide a nation through that process, it could save a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of homes. My opinion.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that needs to be recognized with our program and what we're trying to accomplish is, at its core, it's data collection, right? And data is truth. So if we standardize a process in terms of doing wildfire mitigation testing to do condition assessments after a wildfire or after a flood or whatever other emergency that mass emergency that happens within the community, it's data, and that is the only way that you get a response from the federal government is if you provide the data to them and force them to react to that data. Because just empirical information and saying, yeah, we need $50 million to fix our homes doesn't do anything, because they always say, well, prove it. And the only way we can prove it is by collecting the data and providing it to them. And that forces them to have a fiscal response to that issue that's identified.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that. Because data is right now, it's sparse in so many areas regarding, especially treaty nations and any reserve or self-governing nation. The data it exists. It's just the collection and the integrity of that collection and making sure that it's collected the same way. It plays a critical role in those funding requests, right? And the continued advancement and reimbursement of those funds, especially following an emergency or disaster. It's kind of weird. That's all the government wants, right? Is if you can continually feed them reporting and numbers and that justification for the money, they keep feeding that up their hierarchy. And it seems to mostly satisfy their requirements most of the time. But again, they do always have their breaking point dependent on, budget of the day or the government mandate of the day, but there's a lot of opportunity there for nations to collect their data now, collect it during a crisis, continue to collect it after, and keep that cycle of funding coming in, right? I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is that rhythm.
Well, it's twofold. Like, one is to collect the data to respond to a request and to show the need. But the other part of it is data collection, like especially like with asset management, you collect the data and it helps you understand what your costs are going to be and helps you predict what your expenditures are going to be to manage the life cycle of your housing units. It's the same thing with anything else. Like, you build 30 brand new units, then you have to understand in 10 years you're going to get a bill for $60,000, and that's the cost for replacement of all those appliances that you just put into those new units.
Yeah.
Same thing with roofs. Same thing with all the flooring and all the other mechanical systems in that building. We have to know what those costs are, and we have to be able to predict for them, and we have to be able to do preventative funding requests to address those issues before they become issues, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. So from your perspective, because you've got experience in the insurance industry, you've got, and this was something actually I was going to ask you, because I've kind of, I've always dug into it. Like, for me, having a career that has been a majority in disaster recovery, I've always been heavily involved in, the insurance side of things, because there's always this battle between government and insurance around, what amount of risk should each one have to take on regarding overland floods and wildfires and all that. And I know, I don't have numbers behind this. I think the data exists, but for the most part, especially remote First Nations, insurance is either too expensive. It's not readily or reasonably available. So a lot of people don't have it, and nations can only afford to maybe insure some of their structures. And, the insurance companies right now, they always have funded a lot of money into looking at catastrophic loss reduction for municipalities. And now they're starting to step in and provide funding for, cultural burning practices, helping, Indigenous peoples share their knowledge, and helping younger people learn how to do cultural burning as a way to, mitigate wildfire in areas. And I'm always kind of like skeptical of when the insurance industry does anything that looks positive, because at the end of the day, they're just there to, reduce their risk and make money, like at the very core. What, like, in your mind, with your experience, what should the insurance companies, be doing other than funding, these initiatives? Like, what other benefits do you think they could put out to First Nations for, taking all of their knowledge and cultural burning practices, because they're just going to share that and disperse it with their members and pass it on to municipalities and other groups? Like, what other benefit? Do you have any thoughts or ideas on what other benefits the insurance company could provide to nations? Like, as a, you know what I mean? As like not a transaction, but just to show that they really are working towards reconciliation, I guess.
Well, like, personally, for me, I think we should have a national umbrella policy for First Nations for property coverage, as well as for content coverage for Indigenous communities all across Canada. You think, like, realistically, if that risk is spread across the country, then it reduces the cost to insure these risks. I think the other part of that is, because, like, you look at government Canada spends so much on EMAP emergency response every year. Like, what if they devoted portion of those expenses into doing prevention, right? Like, we know prevention ultimately reduces the cost of issues that face us, like prevention in diabetes, prevention in healthcare, and prevention in road safety. Like, that's why we do prevention, because it's been demonstrated to reduce the overall cost of these issues down the road. And so why don't we fund an umbrella policy to help cover the costs of these events down the road? But in terms of the insurance companies, I think, I think one of the big things that they can do is education in terms of maintenance workshops and doing preventative, uh, helping people understand what they can do to mitigate water and fire losses, and all that is tied to preventative maintenance, right? Doing a 30-minute inspection of your property every 6 months really helps prevent some major issues from happening. Like, we all know stories about that leaky water faucet outside that's turned into a crumbling foundation in 5 to 10 years. Like, that's a $5 repair compared to a $50,000 repair 10 years down the road. Like how easy would it be to solve that issue?
Yeah, no, I like that. It's kind of developing that indigenous, because there are indigenous owned insurance companies out there, but they all have to work within the same market and competition as all the other ones. So it's, I think, there's some challenges there, but having even like a indigenous reinsurer out there that exists to work with all indigenous owned, like, it would be cool to see, I don't know, maybe one exists, like a couple of global insurance companies that are indigenous owned that can develop that reinsurance entity in, across Australia, New Zealand, Canada, US, right? All any indigenous groups, and try and build up that sort of entity would be interesting. Thought exercise, I guess. I don't know if it's possible, but
it'd
that
be
could be
great
done.
to see, because like you look in Manitoba, like a lot of insurance policies I saw were a first loss deductible for a house fire was $100,000, and all of that policy did was cover replacement cost, or actual cash value. Sorry. So a lot of these homes were insured for 200,000, and they paid $100,000 deductible, so they were only able to access $100,000 to rebuild a home in the north. Like, it's not feasible.
Yeah.
So really,
No.
what's the point of carrying coverage?
Exactly. It's backwards, because that goes back to what I was saying about it's not readily available, and it's unreasonable. And and that kind of insurance gives people, I think, a fairly false sense of security, because that's not actually mitigation or preparedness. It's not reducing the impact, because half a house, half your contents is not resilience or recovery. And it does fall back to now, those people have to look at it and say, okay, I can't afford the insurance, or it's useless. So the insurance falls back to the federal government through EMAP, which is, not the best way either. So I'm wondering kind of like where that leads me to with what you do. Like, you can, through your experience and through your program and your training, like, you can bring a lot of these thoughts and ideas and even just considerations or curiosities to the people you train. So when they're in working with the communities, these conversations can be had, I guess, at a local level.
Yeah, I think we try to like we try to bring our training so that our candidates have a larger worldview of Indigenous issues and understand more of what's happening across Turtle Island, because it's so important for us to kind of expand our and understand all the issues that we're facing across Turtle Island as Indigenous people when it comes to housing, when it comes to all those things that we're trying to overcome. But I think the most important part of that is understanding that, like, there's answers out there and there's people doing amazing work, but they're in pockets all across Canada, US, and trying to be able to share that knowledge and share those little tips and tricks is so important. And that's what we're trying to bring into our training methodology is yeah, like we're training somebody from Baker Lake, Nunavut, but we're also training somebody from like Port Coquitlam, and being able to expose those two people to understand, oh yeah, these are things that they're facing up there, or they're facing down south, and sharing that information is how we come up with the answers that face us all universally. And I think that's how we solve the current issues that we have, is because, like, I keep saying, like, why do we keep trying to reinvent the wheel? Somebody out there somewhere is doing parts and pieces of answering that question that we're trying to solve, right?
Yeah, that's where your creativeness kind of kicks in, right? Is you're just kind of using correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're using kind of like the indigenous knowledge, the indigenous ways of learning and sharing and collaborating in community, mixed with the modern day knowledge of home assessment and insurance and all that stuff, and training, learning, adult learning, and you're creating that environment where people can get that awareness, they can share with each other, make those connections. Like, is that fair to say? Like, that's how you're kind of balancing, trying to keep committed to your culture, your traditions, but also kind of combine it with modern day things that work well.
Yeah, I think that really kind of nails it on the head. Is we are, like, that's why we focus on training a local candidate, because, like, a local candidate is the one that understands the history and culture of the people that are there. They're the ones that are best situated to be able to provide a culturally relevant answer to the issue of housing and where it fits within their society. And we're just trying to leverage technology to provide training in a manner that reduces the need for travel and all those extra expenditures to go, like, boots on the ground in remote communities, or bringing them out to train in larger centers. Like you talk about the stereotypical home inspector right now is a 45-year-old male who has 25 years construction experience. Well, in order to bring that skill set to the community level, we're trying to focus on using technology to bridge that gap. And we believe with all the technology that's available, we can take a 20-year-old and in 5 years train them to the point that they have that same skill set as that 45-year-old person. And I always liken technology, because we need to find those, like, that's why we focus on the youth, because they have that intuitive connection to technology because they grew up around it, right? Like, you give a 50-year-old carpenter a smartphone, they make a phone call. But you give that same smartphone to a 20-year-old, and they do so much more with it. And that's what we're trying to
Hey, I'm
leverage, that
50.
skill.
I'm 50. I could use the new technology. But yeah, I know what you're
Yeah.
saying. I get it.
Yeah.
It's true. No, it's so much more productive, and they're engaged, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the youth are engaged with that. And I'm going to tell a really quick story, if that's okay.
Sure.
Because this is hilarious I don't know if it's hilarious or it's just an example of what you mean by having the local people in the community that know the culture. Because I was in a very remote community, bringing in a lot of environmental people and damage assessors, and like 60% of my time with them was spent helping them navigate how to, function in the community. From not only from just like being in the community, but approaching people and approaching a home and talking to that family about, especially their traditional items in the home and how to handle them and what to say and what not to say. And, to use the word regalia, not costume. And I had one experience with someone, because you could only get into this community by boat across a river. And there was a week where they had a massive log jam coming down river, so they couldn't run the boats across. And one of the people on the other side called me and said, "Brad, we can't get over to the community right now. There's, they shut the boats down. There's a log jam. Do you know when it will be over?" And I kind of just like looked at my watch, right? And I said, "Well, are you like maybe 12:30?" But it struck me as funny because I'm not the right person to ask when that log jam is going to be over. And I don't know if, the creator or Mother Nature had a specific time in mind. But if you ask somebody in the community about what they're hearing about when the logs showed up downriver, and how quickly they move at that time of the year, and what other people upriver are texting them and seeing, you could get a pretty accurate time from that. And it was trying to get, also those 50-year-old, 45-year-old white people to also understand the advantage and opportunity to engage with the community on local knowledge and traditional knowledge as a way to help them do their job. Right? Because Brad sitting in the conference room at the band office is not going to be able to tell you what time the log jam is going to be over.
Yeah.
Right. And it's that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we need to be able to bring into any kind of response situation, is leveraging that local knowledge, right? Because without that local knowledge, like back to that old saying, why are we reinventing the wheel? And that's a lot of the problems that are faced by government entities that come up with these ideas to solve any crisis on a desk in Ottawa. When they go out to these communities, all of a sudden they're faced with situations that they never envisioned in their disaster planning, right? And that's where we need to bring those skill sets to the forefront and be at the table when we create these responses and these answers, is having that local knowledge to say, that's it's a great idea, but it's never going to work because of this, or this. And, like, can you imagine how much money that saves in the long run if we actually built that into any design process?
Oh, absolutely. And if you're like, I'm glad you brought that up too, because it is, I think it's impossible unless people from the government or Ottawa, wherever they are, go to the community themselves and spend more than just a day trip. Like, they need to be there for, in my mind, I would say at least a season, to really get that understanding of how time works in a lot of these remote communities. Because when you add up the fact that, the boats aren't running across river, and, the manager for a program has to take their 3 kids 2 hours away to a dental appointment every 3 months, and, the time that it takes for that commute, and they have to go to 2 hours down the road to the major grocery center. Like when you add all of that up over the course of the year, people in Ottawa are working their full 40 hours a week all year. People in remote communities are on average lucky if they're averaging 5 to 6 hours a day in the totality of things. Because of that big difference. And Ottawa doesn't understand that. And I noticed too, like, because we were having issues with BC Hydro because they were ramping up their Site C dam, and they wanted data around how often the boats couldn't cross the Peace River because of water level fluctuations. And they wanted some magic number to say, like, yeah, it impacts this. And the nation was like, well, it's day to day. Like, we kind of like run it as needed, and we stop when we have to. And if the water goes too low and the sandbars have built up over the last 3 or 4 years, it's kind of like we just stop and we wait, and that's part of life, right? They don't record every instance that a log jam comes across to show the impact. And it was funny because I asked the BC Hydro lady, who's the Indigenous relations person, I said, we're not going to have that data for you to make this decision. I said, do you, every time your shoelace comes undone and you have to stop and tie it, do you pull out your phone and record that to understand how it impacts your life? Right? And she said, no. Yeah. And I said, well, that's what you're kind of asking this community to do, is that, they're not going to stop and record every second a boat motor goes down or the water goes down or a log jam comes through, because that's just part of life. It's there. Everyone sits in the lineup for the boats. Nobody complains because that's the way it is. Right.
So that's so true.
Yeah. And that's when I really try to paint that picture to people in Ottawa. And I think there's also an element too, that when they, even if they could spend a couple of weeks on a reserve and experience all that, they're still going to end up going home and getting comfortable back in their setting and, getting, run around by their bosses to do this and that and make sure this happens. And they kind of forget. But absolutely, Ottawa needs to, if they're going to run these local programs, if they're going to run and manage the funding for these local operations, I think they really do need more local liaisons or local people on the ground that can paint that picture back to their headquarters. My opinion.
Yeah, totally. That's totally.
Yeah,
that's.
And I think that's what I love about your program is, you empower and create those local people so they can send the data and information, the message that Ottawa needs to at least move forward. And it's a local person doing it. It's not someone coming from the outside who thinks they understand the local context doing it. It's actually somebody there that is trained and empowered and can communicate that in government speak. So in the policy, right? That's what I love about your program.
That's kind of one of the things we try to bring is ownership of the process, right? And accountability. Because if just faceless bureaucrat shows up to inspect your house, you're not going to talk to them. They're just going to let them do their thing and leave. But if Jimmy from 3 doors down is the one inspecting your house, then you talk to them and tell them all those things that's affecting your quality of life in that house. Plus, at the end of the day, if Jimmy doesn't do a good job, then you walk 3 doors down and give him a piece of your mind, and that creates accountability, right?
Jimmy doesn't get dry meat in the fall.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I love that, because I know that was something I notice is it takes an insurmountable amount of time extend. Oh, sorry, I got to extend your call. Weird. It takes an insurmountable amount of time to build the trust in the community that is required for members to trust you, to tell you what's wrong. Totally, like, because they're so, they just, and rightly so, if they even get a whiff that you might be government or associated with government, right? What are the first few things that pop in their head? Well, they're here to maybe take my kids. They're here to take away my home. They're here to maybe reduce funding or social assistance. They're here to judge me, right? So why would you open up to someone like that? And yeah, having that local leadership brings out so much more data to use it, binary, for sure. Yeah, like, okay, so we're like 52 or so minutes into this. What haven't we touched on that you think is important, for this, for the audience, our audience to hear?
I think I think just the fact that we need to create ownership of the process, because when we control what we inspect, when we control what our scopes of work, our cost estimates are, we decrease the cost of doing that work, because like now you're not getting a general contractor involved that can charge an extra 10-15% markup just for taking the role of GC, right? You don't have to accept the price for the one contractor that shows up to actually create a scope of work for you and give you a price for the repairs. You can actually take your own scope of work and farm it out to 5-10 different contractors and say, give me a bid on this project. The same thing with material supply. You can send that to 5 different suppliers in your area and say, give me a price for a landed cost, because with a landed cost, you don't pay tax on that. So just following those steps and utilizing energy rebate programming and creating ownership of that process, you can decrease the cost of a project by 50%, which is a huge amount, right? Like now a community that has $1 million budget for housing now has a budget for $2 million. Like, how much more can you do with that?
Yeah, it's so true. The efficiencies that can be made just through some, good relationship building, some planning, some risk assessment, involving so many different perspectives. There is ways to do it. Yeah. And I think, like, for me too, just watching what you put out on LinkedIn, which I want to say thank you very much for all that you share and put out. Because it is, like, I am learning from it, and I know other people are learning from it. And, whether I'm able to actually, take that learning and transfer that knowledge into benefit or, actual operational or tactical value for people is maybe yet to be determined. But I know, given if we get involved in whether it's planning, helping in disaster recovery planning, helping to set up some sort of like damage assessment process, like, you're my first call, absolutely my first call. And, I think that is solely because you've put yourself out there, you're teaching, you're giving, and it's just, I think you're drawing in that energy. So just know that I think there's a lot of people like me out there that are kind of trying to get you involved in their work and help you develop too. It's just, we've got our challenges, and we've got to get our contracts and our trust built up. But I think if we keep down this path, we're going to do well. and serve those that need the help.
So problem is years in the making, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the answer is going to be years in the making as well.
Yep.
We don't expect anything to happen overnight, but it's just I applaud people like you and all the other folks that are out there just grinding away, because that's the only way we're actually ever going to achieve the success, is just keep pounding on those doors and wear the people down that make that decision, right?
Yep. No, it takes a collective, and it takes holding our publicly funded institutions to account, and our own elected officials, and our own leadership, and even our own people on both sides, right? It's just reconciliation and honoring the treaties, and learning how Canada can be a better country if we involve Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous peoples, communities, and just share, right? Like that's all it takes. It's not hard.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's hard. I don't think it's hard, but it is a bumpy, gravelly road some days. I wish was paved.
Yeah, definitely.
Where can people find you? What's the best way to get a hold of you? Where can people find you and what you're doing and putting out there?
Oh, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my best source. That's the only platform we use to do business development and really spread our word, because I find it's a lot more business friendly than other mediums. Yeah.
We'll be sure. We're gonna now kind of toss you out into TikTok and YouTube and Spotify and all of our channels and get that message out. So I think your website, like they can just Google Zachary Knight Enterprises, or is that the best thing to Google? Okay, and then they can find you on LinkedIn at Stan Knight.
Yes.
Okay, and in all the descriptions of all of our posts for this, we'll include your LinkedIn profile, your website info too, so it'll be readily available in the descriptions as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Brett. Really appreciate it.
Anytime, man. And I know we will be working formally together here in the very short future, because we're close to that convergence point, and getting what you're doing, for me at least, in an emergency management, disaster management context, solidified and things like that. So yeah, let's stay tuned, and we'll do this again.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. I really think this year we'll be collaborating on a few things.
Yeah. Awesome, Stan Knight. Well, you take care of yourself and stay safe and warm, and we'll chat later.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, Stan.
Yeah. Bye.
Thanks for joining us at HazardScape. You can subscribe to our YouTube and find our ad-free training videos by becoming a supporter on Patreon, with a network of other Indigenous peoples looking to make their communities safer. And remember, know your HazardScape and be prepared. I think that worked.